Yeah, hi folks. Now in this video, Matt Walsh really rips into Maori, and rightfully so in my opinion, and hat tip to Poncho Lapez and Kurt Graham for this one.
Several politicians in New Zealand just broke out into a primal Stone Age war dance called the Haka to protest a piece of legislation that's working its way through Parliament. They won't stop doing the chant, and eventually, because of that, Parliament has to be shut down entirely. Watch.
E ono ngā pōti e whakahe. Kawana! Ka whakamanu whiriti a koe! Kamate, kamate,
Yes, the Maori Party, New Zealand's national embarrassment. A complete embarrassment. Go and sit down, you stupid pricks.
The House is suspended until the ringing of the bells. The gallery is to be cleared.
Now, you know, this Haka dance, it's very dangerous. And you can tell the people doing it, they think it's real spooky and really scary. It's real intimidating. And they're right, it is dangerous because it may cause everybody in the vicinity to die of secondhand embarrassment. You know, it's hard to watch this video and not have the same reaction that the Speaker of Parliament has. It's painful to sit through. Now, thankfully, a few people have dubbed the audio in various ways. There's one remix that turns it into a jazzy little piano number from 1925. It actually works surprisingly well. And because it's a Friday, we might as well play it. Plus, it shows you another angle so that, you know, we can justify playing it that way, I guess, also. Watch. You know, it's a lot less cringe when you dub in some real music instead of the prehistoric grunting. Now, it's a little hard to see in all the pandemonium, but they're getting in the face of a politician named David Seymour, who introduced a bill that they don't like. The people doing the screeching identify as Maori, meaning they see themselves as the allegedly indigenous people of New Zealand, and they're chanting like barbarians and making gun gestures at David Seymour while saying something that apparently translates to evil. And before I get into the specifics about this vote, what it was about, it needs to be reiterated that this whole Haka thing is just silly and embarrassing.
Yes, I hate it.
Maybe you're not supposed to say that, but it's obviously true. And everybody who sees it knows that, feels the same way. You know, and you see these videos sometimes, we're supposed to pretend like we think it's powerful and cool because it's part of a non-white culture, and so therefore it has to be good. We're not allowed to have any negative opinions about anything that a non-white culture does, but we all know that it's just lame and stupid as hell, and you know,
Yes, and pushed onto us by our wokies.
We can say that, like that. Just knock it off. This is ridiculous. You're making fools of yourself. These people are really embarrassing themselves in every context that this Haka is performed. It's cringeworthy to an immeasurable, painful degree. So here, for example, was the Haka that New Zealand's basketball team performed at a tournament in 2014, just before getting blown out by double digits by Team USA. Just look at the reactions during this. Yes, there's nothing like a fearsome war chant before a basketball game where everybody looks at you like you're crazy, and then you get completely destroyed. They got blown out, which is why this just doesn't work. You can't do a fearsome war dance on behalf of a conquered people and then get conquered some more. It's just kind of sad at this point. You know, the Maori have been doing this dance for centuries and they just get beaten every time in every context, in every type of battle they've ever been in, at least for the last 700 years. So, you know, it's like probably time to put it's like spiking the football when you're on a football team that hasn't won a game since the year 1300. It's just like, all right, it's probably not a lot to be showboating about right now. In any event, back to the viral clip that people are talking about. The so-called indigenous people had a meltdown in Parliament over a bill. And what you may not have seen is what preceded that moment. David Seymour laid out some rational and calm arguments in favor of his legislation. And then the so-called Maori politicians launched into a volley of personal attacks. Watch.
Pressure had been building all afternoon as the government's treaty principles bill came before the House.
The bill does not extinguish any right, it does not take from anyone, it reinforces the rights of the treaty as universal.
David Seymour says the current approach to treaty principles isn't working.
What all of these principles have in common is that they afford Māori different rights from other New Zealanders.
But the rebuttal came fast and furious.
Shame on you, David Seymour. Ngāti Rehia will be ashamed that one of their sons has come up with a political stunt that looks to divide the nation. How dare you, David Seymour? You should be ashamed of yourself, and you are a liar.
Apologise for that last statement.
No, I can't do that.
Going to have to ask the member to withdraw himself from the House for the rest of the afternoon.
Willie Jackson sin-binned, but unapologetic.
Now already, this is how you know these people have no argument. They're only capable of shouting shame and resorting to personal attacks to the point that they repeatedly get thrown out of Parliament. Meanwhile, David Seymour is sitting there calmly saying he wants equality. Now, admittedly, I'm not an expert on the finer details of New Zealand politics, so I went looking through some New Zealand outlets to try to get as complete a picture as I could about, you know, what's going on here, what the controversy is. Turns out the concept of equal protection under the law is actually extremely controversial in New Zealand. So here's the background. Hundreds of years ago, around the late 13th century, Polynesian settlers arrived by canoe in New Zealand. And they became the Maori people. Depending on who you ask, they were either the first to arrive or they massacred everyone else who was already there when they got there. In any event, before long, the Maori wiped out a different tribe called the Moriori, I think is probably how you pronounce it, who were pacifists living in the Chatham Islands in the east. And they got enslaved and beheaded and cannibalized by the Maori because apparently that's what, you know, civilized cultures do. And to be clear, this kind of thing was not out of character for the Maori. The Maori routinely enslaved and brutalized their enemies, just like so-called indigenous cultures all over the world. I mean, this is what they all did. The moment they acquired muskets from European traders, they fought a series of battles amongst themselves called the Musket Wars, which led to tens of thousands of deaths and even more slavery. These are wars, of course, the Maori now blame the British for. They also bartered with severed heads, which they called toi moko. They would cut people's heads off and tattoo them, and then...
Yeah, just like Rawiri Waitittis.
Use them for trading. This is kind of what Maori culture was all about. Cutting heads off each other, bartering, cannibalizing, big thing with the Maoris. Eventually, the British came in and provided some stability with something called the Treaty of Waitangi. The idea was that New Zealand would become a British colony, but that the Maori would have their rights protected. They could keep their land and so on to the extent that was possible. And then in 1975, New Zealand recognized this treaty in law for the first time. But there were still a big gray area as to what exactly this treaty required. It established tribunals and led to a lot of rulemaking by judges, but Parliament mostly stayed out of it. Now, with this new bill, David Seymour is trying to change that. He's proposing concrete legislation that will clarify that everybody in the country, in New Zealand, whether they are Maori or not, is entitled to the full protection of the law. He also wants to make it clear that New Zealand is self-governing. The Maori are not a nation within a nation.
Yeah, now I'll just skip past this ad.
Here's how one New Zealand station describes the proposed clarifications.
Let's compare the current main three principles with the bill before Parliament. On partnership, the treaty created a relationship between Māori and the Crown, and both parties must act with the utmost good faith. The new Principle 1 states the government has full power to govern and Parliament has the full power to make laws in the best interests of everyone. Principle 3 addresses protection. The existing understanding is that the government prioritises the active protection of Māori interests, rights, taonga and rangatiratanga. The new proposed Principle 3 states everyone is equal before the law and entitled to equal protection and benefit without discrimination. Everyone is entitled to the equal enjoyment of the same human rights without discrimination.
So these are clarifications that if you want to live in a modern civilization, an advanced civilization, instead of a backwards hellhole, seem pretty reasonable. But it does mark a change from what's happening at the moment. Right now, New Zealand explicitly provides reparations to people who identify as Maori.
It's called a permanent Maori grift.
In addition to affirmative action, they just announced a, quote, financial redress of $30 million plus interest to Maori tribes, along with a fund of more than $1 million to assist with cultural revitalization. New Zealand politicians also regularly give lengthy apologies to the tribes, like this one. Watch.
I'm here at Ngāti Maru's official settlement ceremony, where a representative from the Crown is going to deliver an official apology.
The Crown makes the following apology to Ngāti Maru. The Crown's many breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi left Ngāti Maru feeling like refugees in their own homeland.
Yep, just keep apologizing. 500 years of apologies won't be enough. Just keep on forever. It could be 1,000 years from now. We need more apologies. Just keep on apologizing. This kind of thing has been going on for decades in New Zealand. They fly the Maori flag. They apologize to them incessantly, pay millions of dollars. And in the end, it's not enough. The demands keep coming. As a result, now their news reports are barely comprehensible because they're all speaking a foreign language. So here, for example, is how that New Zealand television station explains what the Maori are so upset about.
One of the major concerns from opponents of the bill is the absence of any mention of tino rangatiratanga, that loosely translates to Māori autonomy. The bill proposes to take those principles to a referendum for the public once passed, but it's a bill that looks doomed to never get to that stage.
Did you get that? Tena rangatiratanga. Is that how you pronounce it? I think I nailed it. I think I just nailed it. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, yes, one of the main criticisms of the bill is whatever that is. They have to translate it so that people in New Zealand can understand what's even going on. So it turns out that the Maori want the ability to remain autonomous from New Zealand, which in democracy seems pretty questionable. The opposition wants to put that up for a democratic vote, and of course the Maori are refusing. They don't care what the people of New Zealand think about what should happen in New Zealand. But the people of New Zealand should care, and we should care as well, because what's happening over there is a case study that we should pay attention to. And what I mean by that is that New Zealand has bent over backwards, apologizing for the alleged evils of colonization. They've paid out reparations, they've flown the flags, they've done everything. They've centered their whole society around land acknowledgements and so on. And now there are pagan chants breaking out in the middle of Parliament. That's what they get for all of this kowtowing and bowing and submitting. This is what they get. The Maori are explicitly campaigning against equal rights. And they're threatening politicians who don't agree with them. This is a sort of enrichment that Western societies can expect when they start apologizing for their own existence. And as Douglas Murray has pointed out, none of this makes any sense given the Maori's history. If we're going to play the game of generational guilt, they should be apologizing to all the people that their ancestors have enslaved. Watch.
I'm sorry. Who were the Maoris historically? Were they men and women of peace who sat around idyllically farming and having an Edenically civilized life? Or were they brutal, brutal people who did terrible things to each other and to people they met? The trade in decapitated human heads as a tool of bartering to buy goods, including muskets, by the early 1800s. I'm sorry, I'm not willing to have my own culture ransacked and turned through this lens of pure evil, and simultaneously be expected to pretend that the Maoris or the indigenous people of Australia were these proto-Gandhi-esque figures, sort of Mother Teresa with a bit too much beheading. No, this is totally untrue. And it's an obvious attempt to subjugate people in the West to a false ideology and a false version of our own past.
Exactly.
So, as he correctly explains there, the Maori were a violent, brutal people. They practiced cannibalism, many other forms of horrific brutality. But just because they made it to New Zealand a few hundred years before Europeans, we're supposed to see it as some great tragedy that the Europeans took over. In fact, we're supposed to blame Europeans for engaging in violent conquest over people who themselves engaged in even more violent conquest. So keep this absurd, debasing spectacle in mind whenever you hear about reparations in this country or about how oppressed some indigenous groups allegedly are. Even if you give these people what they want for decades, they will always want more. No matter how much you apologize and pay money, it doesn't matter. The moment you suggest withdrawing some of these privileges, or even just like expanding it so that everybody benefits, they revolt. Descend into primal chants on the floor of Parliament. Turn your entire government into an international laughingstock. That's why the only approach to dealing with people like this, the one that New Zealand should have adopted a long time ago, is to deny them any special privileges in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. The more and more we give, the more and more they put their grubby hands out for more.
And to deny them the pleasure of hearing you apologize when you've got nothing to apologize for. Or how about this? How about saying to anyone, any indigenous group anywhere in the world, you apologize first. Okay? You get up and make a big show and fall to your knees apologizing for all the terrible things your ancestors did. You apologize first. You lead by example. When are we going to get an indigenous group anywhere in the world that does that? You apologize for all the terrible things your ancestors did. You do that first, and then we can talk.